Hello everyone and welcome to this new episode of The Kaiser's Kitchen. I also want to take a moment to thank you all for your support from the very beginning of this channel. It really means a lot to me. My goal with this project is in fact to share these fascinating stories from the past with you, and knowing that you enjoy them makes me all the more excited to keep going. If there are any topics that you'd like me to explore in future episodes, feel free to share your ideas in the comment section here below. In today's episode, we'll be looking at one of the most important Jewish cookbooks of late 19th century Germany, and at the woman who wrote it. The complete Practical Cookbook for the Jewish Kitchen was first published in 1888 in Trier by Bertha Gumprich and became soon a standard work for Jewish kitchen and Jewish households in the Kaiserreich. This book goes in fact far beyond that of a recipe collection and stands as a testimony to a life between tradition, adaptation and exclusion. But before we turn to Bertha Gumprich and her work, let us take a look at the historical background. Don't skip. The transition from the late 18th century to the early 19th century marked the beginning of a far-reaching transformation for many Jewish communities in Germany. In the wake of the Enlightenment, the idea arose that Jewish citizens could be integrated into bourgeois society through education and legal equality. The so-called emancipation laws made it possible for Jewish men and women in some regions to attend schools and universities for the first time, to take up new professions or to settle outside of the former ghettos. These developments, however, differed by region and were always reversible. Equality was often tied to conditions such as the abandonment of religious privileges or linguistic and cultural assimilation. Through the so-called Prussian Jewish Edikt, or Edikt betreffend, die bürgerlichen Verhältnisse der Juden in den Preußischen Staate, issued on the 11th of March 1812, Jews living and working in Prussia were granted the same civil rights as other subjects and were no longer legally classified as foreigners. However, the edict also imposed specific conditions and significant restrictions, which were later tightened even further. With the founding of the German Empire in 1871, legal equality for Jews was guaranteed for the first time on a national level. Article 3 of the Imperial Constitution prohibited discrimination based on religious affiliation. This meant, on the first place, that Jewish citizens were formally equal to their Christian counterparts. In the following decades, the number of Jewish academics, entrepreneurs, and cultural figures increased significantly. Especially in cities, an educated Jewish bourgeoisie emerged that actively participated in public life. Synagogues were modernized, schools were funded, Jewish newspapers appeared. The Jewish reform movement searched for new forms of religious practice that were more closely aligned with the life of the modern bourgeoisie. But at the same time, anti-Semitic tendencies increased. As early as the 1870s, the first political and journalistic movement took shape, which no longer saw Judaism as a religion but as a race. These ideas were championed, for instance, by the so-called Berliner Bewegung, or Berlin Movement, a nationalistic and anti-Semitic movement founded in the 1880s by conservative journalists and politicians around court preacher Adolf Stöcker. Anti-Semitic parties gained support in parliaments, anti-Semitic pamphlets circulated in bookstores, and in universities and associations Jews were increasingly excluded. This way a climate emerged in which the belonging of Jewish citizens to German society was fundamentally questioned. For many Jewish families, this meant a double pressure to adapt. On the one hand, they wanted to preserve their religious and cultural traditions. On the other, they had to prove their loyalty to the German national state. As was already the case in the subjects we discussed in earlier episodes of The Kaiser's Kitchen, women played a crucial and visible role here as well. They ran households, organized religious festivals, passed down values and dietary rules to the next generations. Within this context, a cookbook like that of Bertha Gumprich fulfills a double function. It offers practical guidance for daily life and at the same time orientation in uncertain times. It stands as exemplary for the Jewish reality of life in the Kaiserreich, legally integrated, culturally active, but socially vulnerable. Bertha Gumprich was born in 1836 in Trier. She was a trained cook and ran a cooking school in her hometown, where she taught especially young Jewish women in household management, cooking, and the religious rules of the Jewish kitchen. The aim was to prepare them for their role as housewives and mothers in a religiously led Jewish household. In 1888, she published her main work, the complete Practical Cookbook for the Jewish Kitchen. The book quickly became a long-term success, and it went even through a total of 20 editions by the early 20th century. Its publication year is furthermore rich in symbolism, as 1888 became known in Germany as the year of the three emperors. Emperor Wilhelm I died in March, his son Friedrich III reigned for just 99 days before dying of cancer, and Wilhelm II ascended to the throne in June. This rapid succession of rulers and the ascending of Wilhelm II introduced a new era in the Kaiserreich, marked by increasing militarism, nationalism, and a shift in political culture. In this setting, Bertha Gumprich's cookbook served many women as a guide, especially at the time when the oral transmission of household knowledge in Jewish families was rapidly declining. Well, it was surely not the first work of its kind. As early as 1865, for example, Rebecca Wolf had published a cookbook for Israelite women containing a wide variety of cooking and baking methods with a complete menu plan, a household pharmacy, and detailed instructions for the organization of management of religious Jewish households. A pretty long title, I know. Accompanying this development were Jewish women's associations that offered household courses to train young women in domestic management, and which turned the kitchen, as Lea Flashman later wrote, into the temple of the woman. Within this context, the Jewish kitchen in the Kaiserreich was not a closed world, but a dynamic space between tradition, religious law, and cultural adaptation. At the center stood the rules of the Kashrut, a set of Jewish dietary laws that specify which animals may be eaten, how they must be slaughtered, and which food may not be combined, especially meat and dairy, according to Exodus 23:19. These rules governed not only shopping, but also the structure of the kitchen, the cooking utensils, and the entire organization of the household. In Gumprich's complete practical cookbook for the Jewish kitchen, this structure is clearly reflected. The book is organized in such a way that it presupposes the Kashrut laws without explanation. Meat and dairy dishes are clearly separated, there are no mixed preparations, and the order of chapters follows the same logic. But here comes something I found extremely interesting, because in fact the book shows at the same time how much the Jewish kitchen in the Kaiserreich oriented itself toward the German bourgeois everyday kitchen. Many of the dishes, soups, flour-based dishes, compotes, stews, are similar to those found in general household books at that time, but they are adapted, either by omitting non-kosher ingredients or by using preparation methods that preserve the religious framework. Economic aspects also play a role. Gumprich's recipes are mostly simple, nourishing, and easy to implement. The kitchen she describes is not one of abundance, but of moderation, with occasional holiday dishes such as fish with raisins, boiled beef, or stuffed veal breasts. Especially on Jewish holidays, culinary traditions were upheld that were charged with religious or familiar meaning. What is also striking is the strong focus on practice and everyday life. Gumprich explicitly addresses young women who are running a Jewish household for the first time. The recipes are concise and to the point, listing only the ingredients and basic actions. There is indeed no room for storytelling, personal commentary, or experimentation, and this brevity assumes prior knowledge, skill, and a structured routine in the kitchen. And to make sure that none of these details are lost, Gumprich adds a short appendix at the end of the book where she once more summarizes the procedures for setting the table, folding napkins, and attending the guests. It is a manual not just for cooking, but for managing the visible order of a Jewish home. When Bertha Gumprich published her complete practical cookbook for the Jewish kitchen in 1888, the goal was not to invent new dishes but to preserve an existing order. The Jewish kitchen in the Kaiserreich was marked by clear rules, religious, practical, hygienic, and it was precisely these rules that were to be preserved, applied, and conveyed. Because of that, the book does not begin with cooking tips, but with two medical hygienic essays by the Spas physician Dr. Münz. In them, it is explained that the Jewish dietary laws, the separation of dairy and meat, the prohibition of certain animals, the careful rinsing of cooking utensils, are not just religious traditions but modern measures in the service of health. Münz emphasizes the cleanliness of Jewish households, the regular culture of meals, the gentle preparation. Particularly interesting is that those rules are explicitly recommended even for people with stomach issues, a medical view of religious practice that shows how much thinking was changing at the time. Religion here is no longer seen as opposed to hygiene and science, but is brought into harmony with them. Bertha Gumprich expresses herself in a short foreword to the first edition, cautiously but clearly. She criticizes other books that use non-kosher ingredients and those that mix medical advice with recipes. A cookbook for Jewish everyday life, factual, complete, and applicable. This is evident already on the first pages. In an additional note, Gumprich remarks, for example, that Orthodox kitchens do not permit the use of cochineal for coloring food. Instead, she recommends using the broth from the beets pickled in vinegar to achieve shades of red, from the lightest to the darker tones. The structure of Gumprich's cookbook follows a strictly logical order: soups, vegetables, flour dishes, fish, poultry, meat, baked goods, beverages, preserves, and finally, special dishes for the holidays. This structure may seem self-evident today, but at the time of Gumprich it was a clear sign of bourgeois organization. In a kitchen that still functioned without electricity, without a refrigerator for example, and often without running water, such a system of order above all meant safety and control. Especially interesting for us today are the references to new ingredients. For example, the then new vegetable fat palmine was discovered in 1894. It's recommended in an 1807 edition of Gumprich's cookbook as a proven alternative to goose fat. This shows that Gumprich did not simply collect old recipes but also incorporated new developments as long as they confirmed the Jewish dietary laws. This makes it clear: this cookbook is not a window into a foreign world. It is a tool for a very concrete reality. For a Jewish household culture that modernized and professionalized itself in a Kaiserreich, while at the same time trying to preserve its religious integrity. A daily life between adaptation and preservation, between German bourgeois life and Jewish order. As always on the Kaiser's Kitchen, even though the stories are fascinating, we're also here to rediscover the flavors they conceal. So today we're cooking a dish directly from Bertha Gumprich's cookbook, a potato chalet made from cooked potatoes. But first, what exactly is a chalet? A chalet is a traditional Jewish Shabbat dish. Because Jewish law forbids cooking on a Shabbat, this dish was usually prepared before sundown on Friday and then slow cooked overnight to be enjoyed warm at the Saturday midday meal. The word chalet itself is a Germanized form of the Yiddish Schalet, which likely derives from the French chaud lent, meaning slow warm. In German-speaking Jewish communities such as those of Bohemia, Austria and Germany, chalet was the commonly used term. Each region has its own variation, sometimes with barley, beans, beef or even eggs cooked in their shells. What they all shared: warmth, nourishment and continuity, even when nothing else in the household could be touched. This particular version, however, is different. It's made from mashed potatoes and baked like a casserole. Kind of reflects a Western Ashkenazi tradition where adaptations to urban kitchens and modern stoves allowed for variation. Gumprich's recipe is practical, healthy and speaks directly to her audience: women running a Jewish household under modern conditions. To prepare this dish, you will need the following ingredients: a few medium-sized potatoes, some soup fat. Today I'm using clarified butter for baking, along with a generous spoonful of beef fat to add a rich, savory note. A pinch of salt or more to taste, depending on how salty your soup fat or beef fat already is. A pinch of ground ginger. A pinch of ground nutmeg, finely grated. It brings a gentle, comforting aroma that pairs beautifully with the potatoes. Some white bread, a few whole eggs in their shells, a little fine breadcrumbs to adjust the texture if the mixture turns out too soft or sticky. Additional fat for baking, enough to grease your dish generously. So now let's follow Bertha Gumprich's instructions. Peel a few floury potatoes and boil them in salted water until soft. Drain thoroughly and let them steam off until dry. Mash the potatoes finely using a fork or masher. Cut the white bread into small cubes. In a pan, heat some fat and fry the cubes until golden and crisp. Then set the cubes aside. In a large bowl, combine the mashed potatoes, the toasted bread cubes, the eggs, a spoonful of soup fat, a pinch of ground ginger, a pinch of freshly grated nutmeg, a small handful of fine breadcrumbs, and stir everything thoroughly until well combined and evenly seasoned. Grease a baking tray with fat and let it warm slightly. Then spread the mixture evenly into it. Bake for about 60 minutes until the top is golden brown and the center has set. The crust should form evenly and have a rich yellow-brown color. But wait, why only 1 hour? Isn't chalet a dish that usually simmers all night? That's a great question, and it tells us something important about the world Bertha Gumprich wrote for. As we have seen, in fact, the term chalet referred to the traditional Shabbat dish cholent. The term chalet is used here in a broader, everyday sense, hence the 1 hour baking time. To complete the dish, Bertha Gumprich suggests to serve it with stewed fruit, also one of the big classics of Jewish cuisine. Also for this step, I am using a recipe from Bertha's cookbook. Peel good, ripe, tender apples, cut them into 4 parts, Remove the core thoroughly, cook them with a small piece of cinnamon, water and sugar until soft, and stir them finely with a wooden spoon. The addition of stewed fruits to this potato-based dish is especially intriguing as the two were occasionally contrasted in contemporary discussions on nutrition and digestion. A short article from 1890, for instance, refutes the notion that cooked fruit is less nourishing than potatoes. On the contrary, it claims that fruit builds blood and bone, stimulates the mind, and is easier to digest, especially for children. With both potatoes and fruit on our plate, we are certainly on the safe side today. Okay.
Marga mia, ma fai tu, appena sole sfonda l'aurora, da tutto l'ora che tiene, e te fa sentimento fino a sera. Tiene, turchine, solire con lagrime parole, e tu ma niente non so può capacità. Marga mia, ma fai tu, quando in da notte sfonda luna ride, facendo domande brillante, si mango vera fu.
Well, now comes the best part, tasting it.
Senza che saluna, senza fortuna, gara senza capacità. Marga mia, ma fai tu.
It is my first time trying traditional Jewish food, so I don't really have a reference point to judge how this matches the originals. But what I can say is that I really like the contrast between the soft and smooth potatoes with the crispiness of the bread cubes. And the fat adds a gentle richness which doesn't really feel heavy. The overall flavor is delicate, warm and slightly savory, with just a hint of nutmeg and ginger in the background. At the end of the day, it's simple food, but it's thoughtfully composed. For this Potato Schalet from 1888, I'm gonna give 7 out of 10 Kaiser points. In 19th century Germany, Jewish households stood between two worlds, being loyal to the Torah and the Vaterland, and on the other side, adapting to modern life without letting go of century-old customs. This dish here carries this balance. Not through grand monuments or public ceremonies, but through something way more intimate. A cast iron pot on a family stove. This Potato Schalet holds the memory of a community quietly sustained, adapting, enduring, and expressing itself through everyday traditions. So that was it for today, my friends. Thank you for watching and see you on the next time on The Kaiser's Kitchen.